Okay, welcome back to another Cultivate Wins session, and today is special. The human that we're about to introduce you to is special and crazy talented. You guys know really well that we put a lot of content out there for everybody, but sometimes we do something that is very specific for us, for our team at Cultivate Wins, and we ask people to come in and work with our team, speak with our team, because we're still trying to grow personally and professionally so that we can bring our best versions of ourselves to our families, so that we can bring our best versions of ourselves to our clients. And we were just crazy blessed to have Nicole Hudson come and work with our team and speak with our team. Now, we recorded about an hour's worth of that conversation, and we want to make that available now. I'm going to cheat and I'm going to go drive right into her bio, but you should see her bio on the screen. You can pause it and read the whole bio. I'm just going to pull a couple things out of it because there's a lot in there. And no, in the description and on the screens, we're going to also have a number of links where you can find a bunch of resources from Nicole. Last thing I'm going to mention before I dive into her bio, she can go deep. And I'm going to be honest, in an hour, we can't go as deep as we'd like to. So what she's doing is she's actually providing us with, if she was going to go deeper, what are some of her favorite resources? What are her go-to resources? Who are some of her mentors? And she put a full resource list and links together for us and sent that to us, and we have put that together in a blog so that anybody who does want to go deeper, does want to reference some of the things that she's talking about in authors and scholars, you can go deeper. Just go to wherever you're watching this video, go down to the description. There will be a link to the blog, and you're going to see two things. Number one, a copy of all of our notes from this conversation. Number two are all the resources that she shared with us. Oh, I'll say number three as well, just a ton of links for all that Nicole has going on as well. So here is who Nicole is. Nicole is a certified life coach. She's also mental health counseling. I believe she's getting her master's, and that might be finishing up at the time of this video. And the fact is she also has a yoga practice and is a yoga instructor and coach. Now, not only is she a coach and an instructor, but she also puts on amazing retreats. Now, her goal is to integrate Eastern yoga philosophy and Western mental health practices. I love that. Absolutely love that. And Nicole hopes to offer her clients holistic support for their bodies, minds, and spirits. Now, the one retreat that I do want to mention, only because of the timing of this video, this was recorded and our session was in December of 2022. If you are watching this prior to March of 2023, they are doing another year of the Retreat Into You series. And I'm telling you right now, if you go to retreatintoyou.co, we'll have the link in the description and in the blog, you will see that there's a 7-day retreat in Costa Rica. It sold out last year. It is amazing. And I'm going to highly recommend that you take a look at that and consider gifting that to yourself, or at least look into it and look at the other resources that Nicole has to offer at wanderfreely.com. So with all that said, I couldn't be more honored and blessed to be able to share the hour that we had with Nicole. And remember, we keep stopping ourselves because we want to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And there was so much to talk about in that hour. So all the deeper stuff that we kept stopping ourselves on, she has provided those resources for us, and you will find those in the blog. Whew, it's going to be a great hour. You guys take care and share it. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Everyone just heard the intro, so I'm not going to dive too much deeper into Nicole's background and everything else like that because we've covered that. But I am going to, number one, say thank you. You know all the reasons that I'm thanking you right now. We just talked about those before we went live, but I am very grateful that you took the time to do this. Very grateful.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So I have about 1 million different directions and questions that I could ask. I'm going to pause. And I'm just going to start with this. Where would you like to start?
Oh, what a good question. I think I'd like to start at, how do we look at where we are now and where we want to go?
Okay.
And I think that oftentimes we can get so bogged down in what has happened to us that we kind of lose track of where we are. And then when we lose track of that, it's really hard to see where we want to go.
Okay.
So I think it'd be interesting to see, and if anyone else has questions too, like where are we now? Who are we now?
Yeah.
And kind of how do we look at that?
And starting from that perspective, where we are now and where we want to go,
Mm-hmm.
when you're thinking about that or you're working with others, because I know you're about to start your own practice as well. Okay. So this is nothing new to you. Are those crazy accessible? Do you find anyways that those are easy places for people to start, or is even that a struggle for people to be able to be truly aware of where they are now?
Well, I think that's the key word, is awareness.
Okay.
And that's where we try to start, is how do we cultivate awareness
Okay.
of where we are? And I say this with clients all the time, we don't know until we know, right? So it's okay if you don't know, because I've never done this before. I've never been in this day at this time before. And I have yet to meet anyone else who has been. So it can be really challenging to cultivate awareness of what are my values right now, because they change and evolve over time, and values might be prioritized today versus 5 years from now. So cultivating awareness about where we are now, I think, is a really, really big challenge. And once we're able to start to tap into that, then it's like a snowball. Then we can start really moving forward, which is very exciting.
And I am curious on your approach. I love that you said cultivating awareness, because that is empowering. It's awareness, not seeing it just as a gift. In the end, it feels like a gift. There's no doubt about it. But that we do have we can be empowered, that we can actually cultivate it. We can grow it. We can find it. And I'm skipping ahead a little bit, and we'll backtrack again. But then, do you see it very common that you sit in that place for a long time, or is it once you've had that awareness, it's immediately, where do you want to go from here? Now let's go back to where you are now and build that path. Or is that just a very individual thing? I mean, how soon do you bring in, well, where do you want to be? Who do you want to be?
In the big scheme, we sit in that space for the rest of our lives.
Okay.
We sit in that cultivation forever.
Okay, good.
Within a therapeutic setting, it's something I'll come back to consistently. We start to create awareness, and it's going to be very individualized, right? For some people, it might be a concept that they grasp very quickly. For some people, it might take a little bit longer. And there's no right or wrong around it. It's just, how do you connect in with it? And then once a person starts to cultivate that awareness, it's interesting because they come to sessions like, oh, I noticed I did this thing today, or, oh, I noticed this automatic thought popping into my head. So once you kind of open Pandora's box of awareness, it's continuous. And then we can start to recognize, like, what are the behaviors? What are my patterns? And that's really, really exciting to witness with clients.
And what does that look like, both from your perspective and maybe their perspective? Are you seeing, I need to provide practical tools that they can, and cheats and prompts, or whatever you want to call it? Okay. Or what have you found effective to help them in that journey then?
I personally have, I'm just going to say, like, I focus more on dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. So a lot of that is skills training. And not to go too deep into it, but I do, as we've talked about, we enjoy geeking out.
Oh, please do.
So dialectical behavior therapy was started in the 1970s by a woman named Marsha Linehan. And it comes out of this third wave of cognitive behavior therapy. And cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT, a lot of people have either worked with therapists who work in this realm, have heard of it. It's a lot of challenging one's negative schemas and automatic thoughts. However, Marsha Linehan, when working with women who were suicidal and many diagnosed with borderline personality disorder noticed that CBT wasn't quite cutting it. There was something missing. The time frame wasn't quite working. There was just an element that wasn't there. So she brought in Zen mindfulness and a lot of this idea of the middle path and acceptance. And from that, she developed dialectical behavior therapy. And that has become an evidence-based therapy for highly suicidal individuals, depression, disordered eating, borderline personality diagnoses. So it's really been very effective for a wide group of people. And this is what I've been working with and studying for the past year. And the skills-based, it's simple, but not easy. And I think that's why it's so effective, right? It's not rocket science. A lot of the stuff that we do, most of us already know. And if you come back to this idea of yoga philosophy, which I think a lot of psychology and yoga philosophy are hand in hand, just labeled under different words.
Yep.
It's like the idea of chit from the tantric philosophy tradition and the 6 qualities of consciousness. Chit is wisdom. And we have this internal wisdom, but over life, we kind of forget, right? We get these little layers of life, and then it's like peeling back the layers, peeling back the onion. So we start to cultivate awareness around these skills. And then we start to realize like, oh, I know that. Oh, I already knew that. I kind of do that already, but I wasn't aware that I was doing it.
Yeah.
So once you become aware of what you're doing, you can then strengthen that. And that's super empowering, right? Because then people are making a conscious choice to use a skill or to use their internal wisdom or their chit. And I find that's when it becomes very empowering, because it's choice rather than habitual actions or reactions.
Mm-hmm. So
I kind of went down the rabbit hole a little bit.
No, you're not. Go farther. Okay, so one thing, and I'll just bring up a recent conversation. I mean, this is a pretty reoccurring conversation that I have with people, is sometimes we're aware of the fact that, oh my gosh, that worked. I want them to start being, number one, aware of where they feel that they're winning, aware of when they feel like they're being effective. Okay. And then once you're aware of it, stepping back one moment from that awareness and really taking a look at it and saying, is there anything that I can gain from that win, from that effectiveness, to now create a duplicatable way of doing that again and creating that again? So it's the awareness of the win, but then the awareness of what was the process to get to the win, and is that a duplicatable process that I can bring back up? And so one of the phrases that I use nonstop, and I beat like a dead horse, is the fact is I want to see everything as a learnable skill.
Yeah.
If I can see everything as a learnable skill, that's empowering.
Well, I
so
think
it sounds like when you're talking about skills training, is that a new concept or introduction to them? Or as soon as you say it, very commonly, they're like, oh no, that makes total sense?
I think a lot of it, the language around it might be new. Perfect. But again, once we start to get into the concepts, it's clients can come back to the sense of like, oh, right, like I know that. So it's like learning a new language. And like you said, everything is a learning opportunity. However, sometimes we need to unlearn in order to relearn. And, depending on how old we are, we've had 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years of learning and wiring neural pathways to do things in a certain way. So I've said to clients, I'm just asking you to unlearn 50 years of your life. No big deal. We kind of, I like to bring in a lot of humor into lessons, because this is tough stuff, right? I say it jokingly, and I am asking people to relearn, because once we've kind of dug those neural pathways, those deep grooves, it's really hard to reset. But once we can start to reset, we can rewire, right? And that takes time and practice. And it is a learning opportunity. So I think once people start to understand the language, they start to understand what they're looking for. It's exactly as you said. They notice something. It might be in a relationship, an interpersonal relationship with a spouse or a child or a colleague, but they notice, oh, I didn't react to that. I took a moment and I paused. I took a breath. I was able to articulate myself differently. And then that person heard me in a different way.
Yeah.
It's, oh, that's never happened before. Right. So, but we've never tried it before. So it's so interesting to see when we are willing to step back, as you said, and kind of look at, oh, okay, what happens now? For me, that's the curiosity, right? We cultivate the awareness and then we get curious. Well, what is this awareness doing for me? And then therein lies the transformation, I find, right? It's instead of going in and saying like, oh, I've cultivated awareness. Well, now what? We have to be curious about what that awareness can create for us. And then we have the choice to make a change. Yeah. So it's, it can be overwhelming at first, right? Especially with DBT, there's a lot of skills. And during group practices, I think participants sometimes are like, whoa, we're going to learn all of those skills. And it takes time. So it can be overwhelming. It is like learning a new language. And as we learn anything, giving ourselves the time and space, and I think compassion too, like it's okay. This is going to take a little while. But once it's integrated, right? Yeah. And then utilize it from a more holistic place rather than feeling like it's a little forced.
So you've brought up, I started writing them down as you're saying them. You brought up things like talking about specific words, specific language, specific vocabulary. So I'm going to use my direct circle of family, friends, and people that I love like nobody's business. But the fact is if we look at that, the language around things, the vocabulary, the words that we choose tends to be, at least in my circle, a bit of a barrier. Where you could talk about yoga, you could talk about meditation, you could talk about mindfulness, and here's what they hear: New Age. Here's what they hear is whatever. I won't go into all of it, but they see it as very, very, it's not science-based enough for them. Okay. Yep. So the language matters when we're speaking about these things. So the other terms that I heard you talk about is there's an opportunity over time and through the skills-based and the repetition of that, neural pathways change. Okay. Yeah. So if I were to be able to come to them and talk about it from a scientific basis versus talking about compassion and meditation and mindfulness, which they would assume immediately I'm going to pull out crystals and I'm going to start
Not
levitating.
That there's anything wrong with crystals.
Yeah, nothing at all. But that right there would,
them all on the shelf back here.
Yeah, that would weird them out like nobody's business. So it's based, part of what I'm coming to here is in a previous conversation you and I had. Sometimes our language and vocabulary makes this of interest or accessible to those that we're talking to. Yes. Can you speak to that a bit? Because that was something that I enjoyed our conversation about that. Because I will have someone that literally, if I mention mindfulness, they are just going to assume that I'm talking about straight Buddhism and New Age. And not that there's anything wrong with those two, but to them, there may be. Exactly. It absolutely is a turnoff to them, where if I talk about neural pathways, they're like, oh, tell me a little more about that.
Exactly. Well, and I think that's what it is, as you said, accessibility, right? So what is the doorway in which we want to enter into this?
I like that.
So it depends who I'm speaking to. If I'm, I've been a yoga instructor, 8 or 9 years now. And if I'm in a classroom with students, in a yoga studio, I'm going to use a very different language than if I'm meeting a client for the first time. If I'm in a yoga studio, I might talk about the kleshas, our reasons, our ways of suffering. I might talk about the koshas, our different energetic bodies, or the chakras, our alignment. If I'm meeting with a client, I'm going to talk about attachment theory. right? The kleshas are our attachment to our physical human body. This fear of death as mita, which is not unlike this fear that one might have that could send someone into anticipatory anxiety. Same concept, packaged in very different language, right? So knowing one's audience, I think, is important. And then asking. I ask a lot of my clients, I let them know up front, this is my background. If this is interesting to you, we can pull in some of these concepts and ideas. If it's not, that's fine too, right? And oftentimes we're getting at the same concept.
Yep.
It's going to be different language. So if I can talk to someone about dialectical behavior therapy being an evidence-based practice, right? There's research behind that. Mindfulness is one of the key core components of DBT. And so instead of me saying, let's talk about mindfulness and we're going to talk about self-compassion and meditation, and I can start to say, one of the core modules of DBT is a mindfulness practice. And this can come from many different ways. We're focusing on concentration so that our brain can start to pinpoint, right? So it's changing the language a little bit. And I think that makes it accessible. And for me, I don't care what doorway people go in, as long as they're going in, right? And once they get there, they may or may not be open to other concepts, and that's okay, as long as it's working for them and they're seeing shift and they're in a space where they feel like they can grow. I'm okay with what language works for them.
I love that. I love that. Does anybody else, before we kind of move on, and I want to ask Nicole where else she would like to go with the conversation, any questions anybody else has? I mean, I'm kind of bringing up points and questions in point because I am curious on her approach on some of these things, such as language and vocabulary, because it matters in my circle, and those types of things. Anybody else? Okay. Nicole, where would you like to dive?
Yeah, I'd love to actually talk about, what can people do? Maybe, look at a more practical approach for a moment. So that way, anyone who's listening, if they are experiencing anxiety, if they are experiencing interpersonal effectiveness or interpersonal relationship issues, what are a couple things that they might be able to do as takeaways to kind of start the ball rolling? Because again, we don't have to know it all. We just have to know what works for us. And I think sometimes we can get stuck in, especially in the wellness world, especially where self-care is just thrown around all the time. This is just opinion, but I feel like it almost gets to the point where it's like, I feel guilty. I'm not giving myself self-care. And then, I feel guilty on top of that, but I need the self-care because something else might be already going on. So I want to just give people digestible bits and pieces, right? And remember, again, this is a practice. There's no perfection in any of this because we practice, we learn, and then life happens. And then, something else. I mentioned earlier, my mentor, Kobe Kozlowski, she does this again. She does this all the time. Like, there's always more to come, right? Always more to come. And we don't know what's going to come, but there's always more. And I really like that idea. It's like, there's always a new opportunity to practice something and to try again, right? And to begin again, because we don't have to do this once. We can begin again every single day. And it's our choice on how we want to interact.
So 2 things. Number 1, before we end, I want to hear more about Kobe because she mentioned her before we even started this call. So I want to hear more about someone that you care about and has been a big influence on you. Number 2 is I just want to say that I found real value in when you started to say, let's talk about what people can do in a practical approach. And then you went into the fact that sometimes there is self-care that we need. But on top of that, before we even start, we're starting from a point of guilt that we haven't given ourselves self-care. It's like we're piling one thing on top of another.
Oh, it's so hard.
Oh my gosh, unbelievable. So I appreciated you even bringing that one point up because that could go unseen by ourselves. We're not aware of the fact that we need self-care. but we're piling something else on top of that we even have to handle that. Just the guilt that we're giving ourselves. I find that really interesting. So what are some of those practical approaches, things that people can do? What do you think?
Like you said, taking a step back. The stop skill, a lot of people laugh when I tell them this, like, oh, that's so easy. I was like, great, go do it now. It's the stop skill. It's literally stop, take a breath or take a step back, observe. So, a quick scan, like, okay, what's going on in my body right now? What is happening? I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling triggered, whatever might be happening. And then proceed mindfully, or if you don't feel like you can, because sometimes we need to stop twice. If you can't proceed mindfully, then stop again. And it's that split second that might change your life, right? If you stop and pause, you might be able to more fully respond versus react. And a response versus a reaction could make all the difference.
Yep.
And I don't say this lightly, in that could change the course of your life by simply stopping and taking a breath and being able to then proceed in a way that is more skillful. And I think if more of us could do that, it would be amazing to see what happens, right? I might not say that thing, then I'm like, oh, I wish I could take that back. Or, there's just, I might not yell at the person on the train or whatever it is. If we can pause, stop for just that brief second, we can connect back in with ourselves so that we can move forward differently.
Yeah. And I think even the way that you're labeling it, because I think language and labels can matter. They can make a real change in our life. You're calling it a stop skill.
Yeah.
Skill.
Yeah.
Skills will always be learnable things. And anything one person can learn, another person can learn. That's empowering right there.
Yeah.
It's not just, I'm good at stopping. I'm not good at stopping. You know what? They're great at stopping. I'm not that. But if you stop talking about just that one word, stop, I'm good at it, they're not, vice versa, whatever it is, and you add the word skill, it changes that word for me.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. I really appreciate that. Okay.
And, as you said that makes me think of, Dr. Kristen Neff, who is with the Mindful Self-Compassion Institute. She talks about, when you were just saying like, oh, well, I'm not good at stopping, or I am good at stopping. It's one of the things that she's really, or studying and reading some of her writings has helped me with. It's like, well, if my friend was saying this to me, right, it's self-compassion. If my friend was saying, oh, I'm so bad at this skill, I would never say, yeah, you are. You're terrible. You're awful at this skill. I can't even imagine saying that to a friend. And yet I would say that to myself probably. So that could be another skill for someone to practice, right? If you notice that negative self-talk, would you say that to your friend? I doubt it.
We would hope not.
I would hope you would. So that could be another one, like checking in with yourself when there is that self-talk or that automatic negative thought, like, ooh, would I say that to one of my good friends? And if not, maybe learning how to reword it and how to shift it so it's like, oh, maybe I'm going to try to say it to like myself, like I would to a friend.
Yeah.
And that can be really helpful. And again, it's practice. It's not something we do automatically. We're hardwired to the negative. Evolutionary, we have to be, right? And in this day and age, while we do need to be alert and aware, we can start to relearn and rewire some of these things. So we don't always have to go to the negative. And if we do, because we're human, we're able to pull ourselves back.
And I appreciate what you just said, because we will.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'm 51, I think it is. I don't even know my own age, but I'm 51 or something like that. Is even if I were to grow this new skill and I were to build this new skill and I became amazing at it after 6 months, it's still 6 months versus 51 years of conditioning.
Exactly.
It's not even a fair fight. So I love is we can still continue to grow in a skill, but grant ourselves some grace.
Yes.
We're going to fall from
Mm-hmm.
time to time.
Mm-hmm.
We be aware
Mm-hmm.
and go back to the skill that we really wanted to learn to embody.
Yeah.
And be okay with the fact that we're going to screw up from time to time. So
And when
love that.
Up, you know, another nugget that I love, and this comes again from the yoga philosophy, right? We kind of pull it in and out,
Yeah.
is the concept of kula. And again, this is from tantric philosophy, this concept of your sacred community, right? So when you fall, when you feel like I cannot use my skills right now, I am just, oh, who are the people you can call? So knowing your team, and your team might be your friends, it might be your therapist, it might be your family, right? So it's like, who are the people you can call upon when shit hits the fan, really? It's, and part of maybe talking about Kobe briefly is I met Kobe when I was leaving a career, leaving a job, had just left a partner, was at probably like rock bottom. I went to a 2-hour conversation that she was leading at a yoga journal conference, left, and was like,
yeah.
The next morning I woke up and I was like, who do I need to call? Because it hit me that I was like, I can't do this by myself. And so I think it was 6:30 in the morning. I called a friend and she picked up on a Saturday morning at 6:30. And that was the beginning, right? That was the shift of remembering like, oh, I'm not doing this by myself. It's okay to ask for help. And then from there, we can start to, for myself, I'll speak for myself, I then felt stronger to start to go do some of the other internal work I needed to do. But I needed help getting out of that hole.
To be aware when we are choosing to isolate.
Yes. Yep.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So stop skill, proceed mindfully.
Yep.
Give me another practical approach.
Yeah. Mindful distraction.
Okay.
And again, a lot of people will laugh at this. Meditation and mindfulness does not have to always be sitting on a cushion. And for some people, that actually might be counter to their well-being, right? Depending on where people are in their journey, sitting quietly on a cushion might actually be very triggering and very activating.
Okay.
So for some people, mindful distraction might be to watch your favorite TV show, right? And like you said, isolation earlier, I think of isolation versus alone time, right? Knowing the difference, knowing I'm purposely turning on my favorite TV show to slow my mind down a little bit so I can focus my thoughts here versus I'm going to binge 6 shows because I'm avoiding. Right. And so mindful distraction can be a moment to take our mind off of what's troubling us. So that hopefully when we come back, we have a little bit more space, a little bit more clarity. Right. Because, you hear the term like, well, sleep on it and see how you feel. It's all well and good if you can't sleep because you have this worrying thought. It's a little hard to sleep on it. So mindful distraction. It might be a TV show. It might be if you're outside, getting outside and taking a walk. It could be a lot of things. And I think people often can look at it like, if I'm not doing it the right way or the Zen way, it doesn't count. Again, but what's your way? Like what works for you? Because if it doesn't work for you, it's useless. And so it's really finding what works for each individual so that they can incorporate that into their skill set and into their tools to draw upon when they're feeling that overwhelm, or they feel, I call it spiraling, when I feel like I'm spiraling and I notice it, throughout my day, and I say, oh, okay, I'm going into a spiral. What do I need to do? And maybe it's take a deep breath. Maybe I need to go take a walk. Maybe I need to set a timer and scroll through something, right? It's noticing what is effective and choice versus where are we being mindless and habitual. And that takes time. But mindful distraction can be helpful.
So something that you just said is, to me, also what I'm hearing back is it's still also that involves the skill set of awareness, self-awareness,
Yes.
because of the fact that you said becoming aware of what is effective for you.
Mm-hmm.
Without that self-awareness,
Yeah.
um, not to go off on a side tangent, but it's hard for
Oh,
me not to
do it.
ask this.
Do it.
Self-awareness, I still treat as a learnable skill. I think
Yes.
it's something that if we don't have, we can cultivate. And if we do have, we can also lose it without practice. We can get stronger in the skill set. Those types of things. Is someone that you would say recommend some of these practical approaches, the stop, skill, proceed mindfully, mindfulness, distraction,
Mm-hmm.
is would it be very common that
Mm-hmm.
someone is not aware, or maybe they're just, I don't know, maybe the other phrase might be they're just not honest with themselves,
Yep.
that whether something is actually really effective for them. They get caught up in, I'm supposed to do this, so they do that without analyzing, auditing, whatever you want to call it,
Mm-hmm.
whether that's truly effective or not. To me, that comes down to, we've got to be also aware of when we need outside help. We're not our best analyzers of ourselves, and we need to know when to ask for help. So there's all of that too. But kind of where do you see, what would be typical out there? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, self-awareness is hard. And I think it's really hard because once we become aware of what we're doing and maybe that it isn't working, then we're consciously choosing to stay in something that's not working. And so
Mm,
I think for a lot of people,
mm,
by consciously or unconsciously staying away from awareness, they're able to continue a lifestyle that may not be working, but then they don't have to make changes.
okay.
And so I think to cultivate self-awareness, we first have to be willing to change, right? We have to be willing to say, like, actually, this thing isn't working for me.
Okay.
And I no longer choose it. I no
Yeah.
longer choose to be a part of this. And once we have that awareness, we we're then making the choice. And oftentimes people don't want to say out loud, like, I'm choosing to stay in this miserable relationship,
Mm,
right? I'm choosing to stay in this job that makes me
yeah.
cry every morning. But if we cultivate awareness, we then have to look at it. And so I think, again, this is tough stuff. You know, a lot of
Yeah.
this is really hard stuff to do. Um, and again, we don't have to quit the job, leave the relationship, right? The awareness gives us the ability to start maybe looking with different perspectives and to say, well, you know, what is my role in this? And part of awareness, I think, is taking accountability for oneself. I can't change how anyone else is going to act. All I can do is change or shift how I interact. And once I'm able to have that awareness, I can start to make small shifts
Yeah.
and start to see how those maybe affect my relationships, how I feel about myself. Um, I feel like, again, I went down the rabbit hole of something else, but does that
Yeah. I
bit?
think one thing that you brought up that spoke volumes to me is, you could talk about mindful distraction. Someone could even try it. They could actually become aware of whether something's effective or not effective. But there's also another level of, are they even willing to change? Are they at that stage that there's a willingness,
Yeah.
both willingness and desire?
Yeah,
You could have a desire to change, but still not be willing.
exactly.
There's a difference there.
Mhm.
So you going down, to quote you, that rabbit hole. I think that rabbit hole opens up some amazing things. I think that's awesome. So,
And I think,
any,
sometimes with that too, everyone's at a different space, right? We're not all going to be ready to change or shift or want to at a certain time.
yeah,
And, coming back to awareness, and tying it back into yoga, oftentimes when you see people starting to practice asana or the physical movements of yoga, it's interesting, the shift in perspective and awareness.
yeah,
And I think for some people, getting in the doorway might be cognitive. right? It might be more thinking through things. For other people, the doorway might be movement. So to get into a yoga class or any sort of movement, maybe you're a runner, or getting into our bodies can start to shift things, and becoming aware of bodily sensations, right? Maybe I'm not ready to tackle my automatic thoughts or like schemas that I've created throughout my life, but I am ready to start moving or taking walks.
Yeah.
And that bodily sensation and when that awareness of like, oh, I'm feeling tired. Oh, I'm feeling hungry. When it can be down to the biological level of creating awareness around our bodies that can then pique curiosity that expands awareness into other aspects of our lives. So that's why I find the yoga practice in particular, because mindfulness, intention infused into the practice, tends to be kind of ripe for creating this environment for people to then cultivate awareness and take it to the next level, so to speak.
Okay, so I know that you're geeky as the day is long, and I love that about you. So we can get just totally scientific here, but I also know that you have a beautiful yoga practice. Can I just ask, which came first for you?
Yoga came first, and it showed up in college because I wanted to like work out, and I saw these girls going to yoga, and I thought, oh, they have great bodies, and I'm gonna go do that hot yoga, and I'm gonna sweat, and it's gonna be a great workout, and I'm gonna burn calories. That was my idea of practicing.
Okay.
And then I started going, and I just remember like crying during a class. And I know this is not a unique story because a lot of people experience this. And I was like, what is going on? Like, why is this happening? I'm not even upset about anything. And so I kept going back and I kept going back. And, I'd go for a little bit, then I stop and I go. But every time my life got really stressful, I was on my mat, right? And I was going to a class.
Okay.
And so pretty soon that started to create some shifts. And I started going more frequently and started connecting with the community, right? The community around the classes, started feeling better about myself. It was like, interesting. Started creating boundaries. This is, mind you, this is years and years of practicing.
Yeah.
Learning more about the practice, learning more about the philosophy, which led me into more interest in interactions with other people, which led me into coaching, which led me into, psychology and mental health counseling.
Yeah.
But it was that release that cognitively I didn't even know that I needed. But my body, once I finally gave it the opportunity to stop, to slow down, to actually feel something, was then able to make that connection. And then from there, I was able to move into a more conscious decision-making process of where I wanted to go. But I didn't even know. I didn't know I needed it. My body did, but I didn't.
That's awesome.
This body, the thinking body, didn't know.
Yeah. Okay, so talking about the thinking body, so then if that was the journey and the more cognitive side and the science behind the mental health, where was that transition and what was that? Because I think so many people, it's where do I even start? And you've got someone who will start from that physical side and it'll be an amazing thing for them. Other people just wasn't their thing. That's fine. You've got other people that are ready to dive into whether it's books. I mean, I'm a book hound and everything else like that, and I'm going to keep studying and and all that other kind of stuff. And I'm probably going to watch way too many seminars and lessons and stuff like that. But that inspires me. So what was it was it Kobe that inspired you to start looking towards the cognitive side? Was it something else? And what is I'll just say a practical approach to getting into the cognitive side, neuroscience, biology, or anything else?
Yeah. Kobe was a huge influence. That
Yeah.
2 hour workshop, I've joked around with her. I was like, you literally changed my life in 2 hours. So that was a huge influence. And that is what really brought me deeper into yoga philosophy. And as I started studying more yoga philosophy, so much of it is psychology. Or let me
Yeah.
reverse it. So much of psychology is yoga philosophy.
Yeah.
And so it was through the yoga philosophy that I was able to then start asking myself questions, right? In yoga philosophy, we talk about the koshas, or our 5 energetic sheaths. So our physical sheath, our body, our breath body, our mental
Mhm.
emotional body,
Yeah.
right? The consciousness, and then the bliss body. So these concepts are not unlike evidence-based practices
Okay.
that we see in different forms of therapy today. So, really, yoga philosophy is what brought me into wanting to then say, like, oh, look at this thing that's helped me so much from an Eastern perspective.
Yeah.
How do I take this concept and deliver it to a Western world?
Yep.
Um, and so for me, that was, how do I take these ideas with Western background of mental health counseling and infuse them into a way that I can share that with others? So being able to take the ideas, um, thousands and thousands and thousands of years of practice
Hmm.
that, hasn't all been studied yet, but then
Yep.
you look at the evidence-based practices that line up, and how do I start to share that? So the philosophy informed, my want and desire to share that. But like we talked about earlier, not everyone's going to want the yoga side of stuff. So
Yep.
how do I then learn these other aspects so like I can deliver it to a wider group of people in hopes of they can take what works for them and then move forward? And one of the things with Kobe was we had to come up with, during one of my trainings with her, with our tagline, and mine is inspire others to empower themselves, right? So if I can inspire you to learn something about yourself that's empowering, that's what I want to do. If it's a skill, if it's something new about yourself, if it's, peeling back the layers, cultivating awareness,
Hmm.
whatever it is, if there's one thing that will inspire you to move forward,
Yep.
that's what my hope is to be able to do, because then people will grow and move and shift in their own ways. Um, but we got to start somewhere.
So something that you said that, and I have no idea, who all of your influences are, and all those types of things, but it's interesting because I did have it written down too, is Eastern yoga philosophies and Western mental health practices. That is the marriage that you definitely just talked about. It's also the marriage that's talked about in your bio. And that's a lot of where I found Goleman and Davidson as well.
Mhm.
Um, it almost sounds exactly like their transition.
Yeah,
They ended up doing all the, whatever, doing all their trips to India and everything else like that, and everything else like that, and the science reveals how meditation changes your mind, body, and brain. And they're like, okay, we see amazing things, whether it's in a yoga practice. For them, it was meditation practice. And they're like, what's the data behind it? Now, they started this in the 70s and there was very little data,
exactly. Exactly.
which we benefit now. There's so much data now available with what you are teaching and what you are preaching. Um, where would someone go to
Yeah.
find some of that data, that evidence-based data that helps them to back up that these have validity? And for my friends and family, it's not just woohoo and new agey and all that other kind of stuff. What's the evidence-based data that would be accessible to someone out there?
Something that might be interesting as a starting point is mindfulness based stress reduction, MBSR. And John
Yes.
Kabat-Zinn
Yeah.
started this. Um, Brown University has a program. I believe it's the Massachusetts Institute. I'll have to double check, but I'll send you a link
Sure.
where John Kabat-Zinn is based. Um, so I would say that's a good place to start.
Yeah.
There's universities. that are doing a lot of research on MBSR, which is great. You can start to look at some of the practices like, as I mentioned, dialectical behavior therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, let's see, emotion-focused therapy. So you're starting to see some of these other therapies that incorporate mindfulness.
Yep.
So you can look into those. The Esalen Institute is an institute in Big Sur, California that was started in like the 1960s. So a lot of Fritz Perls, who is known as like the father of Gestalt therapy, lived out there. Alan Watts used to speak out there. So there's going to be a lot of speakers have gone through the Esalen Institute. Really wonderful, amazing to go. It's just a beautiful, beautiful space. But then you have people like Rick Hansen. You know, there's different doctors, medical doctors, and psychologists who are writing about this stuff. So I can, you know, share a number of either psychologists or doctors who are doing the research, doing the studies. Hardwiring Happiness. Rick Hansen is a wonderful one that talks about the neuroscience.
Yep.
And how these different practices can change us and change our brains. So,
and for those that are watching and curious, we are hardcore going to be putting together a blog with this, and we will put resource after resource after resource. So if you're listening to this and you're trying to take notes, I started to do something when you started to list out your first 3 or 4 of them, because I've got a bunch of those in my favorites already saved in my their websites and stuff like that. And I'm like, I was just about ready to pull up one after another. And then you were so good at listing out so many. I'm like, well, this is a losing battle. I can't pull these up this fast. But we will definitely put together a resource list and make this available to people for sure.
The fact that there is such a long resource list.
Thank you.
Me so happy, because it means more people are studying this, are publishing about this. You know, there's, gosh, it's like I almost draw a blank because there's so many, you know, different journals, academic journals that are talking about this. So there's lots of different ways, depending on what your interest is. Again, depending on what works best for you, there's different ways to research this, and we'll include some of those things so people can find their own doorway.
So if I could ask you, and I don't know where you would go with this or what your thought is mental health is just a huge area of interest and study for me. Now, have I made a complete career out of it like you're doing? No. I feel like I have, but I haven't. Okay. When I look at that, someone the other day when we were talking about it used the word spectrum, and they wanted to talk about people's from a mental health perspective. Is where are you on that spectrum? In your studies and in your profession, that was just something that just seemed naturally to come out of their mouth, but they were using usually on the spectrum. I know why they use the word spectrum, because there's another topic they have an interest, and that is a key concept, is on the spectrum. Is that a concept that you deal with quite a bit? Is it a thought process you have, or where are you in talking with people as to where they are with their mental health?
Sure. I think depending on who you're talking to and depending on the conversation, that language might, you know, work and be appropriate in the conversation. I heard something the other day on someone talking about normal, like what's normal. And, you know, this doctor, and I'll have to find it again, was saying like there isn't
the myth of normal.
Oh, interesting. I don't know if, no, that wasn't it, but I'm like, wait, let me write that down.
Gabor Mate. I love him. Love him, love him, love him.
Right.
Not a light read, but it's awesome.
However, he was saying like there is a normal range, right? There is a normal range in which human beings can exist. And so it's not to say that something is normal, but what is the range in which we're able to exist? And so if somebody is experiencing something that is causing them so much distress that it is inhibiting them from being able to go through their daily routines, or, you know, it's causing them, as you mentioned, to isolate, if it's to the point that is no longer within their normal range, right? So if something is going
Their
on,
normal range. I love how you said that. Their normal range.
what might be really upsetting for
Yeah.
me that I consider be debilitating for somebody else might just be another day, right?
Okay.
So it's not to say that what I'm going through is harder or easier, but how do I relate to it? And if it causes dysfunction in my life, then that's out of my normal range of functioning.
Relative to the self.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
To the
So,
individual.
yeah. So again, it comes back to awareness, like becoming aware of I am no longer functioning within my range.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, what do I need to do about it so that I can come back to functioning once more?
And I love that you just said, again, coming back to, and we keep coming back to the word awareness.
Yeah.
So probably one of my most common phrases out of my mouth that I say to myself is self-awareness is my freaking superpower. Self-awareness is my freaking superpower. But let's just admit, self-awareness could be a new skill for someone.
Yes. Yep.
So if you were going to, and maybe you wouldn't, but I'll ask, we all love our friends. We love our family. We want to be as helpful as possible. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the best way to be helpful is to not be helpful. It's to help them to realize that they could use some real professional help. And that's not us. If we have a fear, because you're talking about mental health and it is your profession, and someone still wants to talk to us and we want to listen and we want to love, do you have any guidance for anybody that is not the professional and you do question maybe they could really use some real help?
Yeah, this is hard because we all want to be there, right, for the ones that we love. And sometimes advice giving or that seems to be human nature, like, oh well, let me help you, let me tell you this. The other day I had to ask a friend, do you want advice or do you just want me to listen? And sometimes we might have to ask that, because there are times where it's like, I genuinely, as a friend, I don't know what to say to you right now. I don't know how to make this better. So what is it that you need right now? Right. And the friend responded, I don't need anything. I just need to say this out loud. So I would say ask what the friend needs. And depending on one's relationship, you might even say, like, I love you. I want to be supportive. I want to be here for you. And I don't feel equipped to support you in this way or to help you. Is there any way I could help you find someone who is? Right? Because also we don't want to take on the responsibility of having to do something that's out of our scope of practice. Right? And we can do that a lot as friends, as partners, as parents. There's a lot of that. So I think being realistic in your boundaries of what do you feel comfortable offering and where do you feel like you've gone out of your scope of practice, and being honest.
All right. So now I'm just going to bring it back. You keep saying I'm going to bring it back to awareness. I think you just did again. It's not just awareness for the person that's having trouble. It's awareness for the person that's listening. Is your phrase, are you aware enough to even say, I don't feel equipped?
Mm-hmm. I had a friend once ask, do you have the capacity right now to talk? And I just thought that was such a great question. And I paused and I thought, oh, do I actually have the capacity to listen to what she needs right now? And I had never thought of it like that before. But since then, I've really thought about that. Like when someone's coming to talk to me, do I have the capacity to be fully present, to listen, to hold space?
Yeah.
Because if I don't, am I then doing my friend a disservice? Right? Am I irritated? Am I going to be sure? Am I thinking about something else? So do I have the capacity to hold space for someone else right now? And if no, the kindest thing I think to do is to let them know that. And that's starting to push those boundaries and that interpersonal relationship of being that honesty and that awareness. And it can be hard to do that at first because you're shifting the dynamic within the partnership or the family unit. But when one person shifts, the orbit shifts.
Yeah.
So if you start to cultivate awareness within yourself and then you start to communicate that in different ways, other people can then respond. They might react at first. They'll probably react at first. And I think with practice, we can learn to better respond to each other from that place of awareness.
Okay. So I'm crazy selfish right now because I'm looking for about another maybe hour or 2 hour of this conversation. I literally have not looked at the clock once until just now. I cannot believe that was about an hour. Dang it. Not ready to wrap this up, but let's do this. Chrissy, I know you've been taking notes like a crazy woman because that's what you do. I'm looking forward to seeing those. I will say that. But Chrissy, Nicole, Karen, anything from here that you've either got a question or just something that you want to point out that you're like, that jumped out at me. I either wanted to hear that was confirming, that was new. Not everything's new, not everything, it's what today?
Well, I'll go first. I've actually been holding on to this since it's been mentioned. Everything jumped out of me. I know that's crazy, but I totally David's right. I've been writing notes like a crazy person because I was. And I'm super excited to share this blog with a lot of people because I've seen so much value. But one thing that I've been holding on to since it was mentioned was about the self-awareness that we first need to be willing to change. And something that's been like on my mind throughout since that has been mentioned is that it's not just about being this it's not just about desiring to change. It's also about being willing and capable of doing it. So I love the skill set that you've mentioned, or the where to start. That's totally helpful because it's something that I can learn to and practice doing. And once I'm capable of actually doing the change, then maybe that's where I'll be able to. So I'm actually at the process of unlearning so many things that the pandemic had taught me. So since we're trying to like normalize in a sense after the pandemic, there's so much to unlearn and relearn, and having this like this knowledge with me is very, very helpful. So thank you so much for everything.
Thank you for sharing that.
Nicole, Karen?
Karen, you're muted.
Oh, Karen, there you go.
Thank you. Thank you. My little dog was also running around like a crazy lady, so I thought I would spare you all. But I've been hanging on to something since the beginning also. And I think, and really, I mean, the comment was, you don't have to know it all. You just have to know what works for you. Because I feel overwhelmed when I think of self-care, or I think of, how am I handling things, or what can I be doing better? And there's so many things that you can do that adds to my stress and anxiety.
Yeah.
And so just giving myself that grace and that little nugget of, you don't have to know it all. You just have to know what's going to work for you, and that can ebb and flow. Really, that just hit me. So thank you for that.
Yeah. I think a lot of us can relate to the fact that it's just overwhelmed, just the options and what do I got to know and where do I start and everything else like that. So we don't really start and we don't really make progress. And so I appreciate you saying that. I think that's probably a common feeling for a lot of us that we haven't had the awareness around too. Nicole?
Sure. Yeah, for me, I mean, a lot of what you said really resonated, but I think what had the biggest impact was at the end when, working through your other interpersonal relationships. There's a few relationships in my life that I don't know why, but the thought never crossed my mind to actually ask them what they need. Like I'm a helper. I want to give advice. I want to like fix things for them. That's who I am as a person. It's one of my core values, but that's not necessarily what they need. And then I also have relationships in my life where I know that I'm not the person that can fix, and giving me something to say in those situations. I don't feel equipped to help you in this way. That is so powerful for me, especially as I'm going into the holidays where I'm going to be seeing these people, spending a lot of time. It's really, really helpful for me right now. So thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah,
sharing.
Yeah, another tool on our tool belt. Just that phrase, literally, just a simple phrase.
Literally.
Yeah, 100%. Oh my gosh, my friend. I'm excited for you. You've got so many great things that have been going on for you this last year, and coming to an end of studies here in your final paper that was, I think, yesterday or today, all done with that. So I'm hoping you can go into the next couple of weeks with just a sense of peace. You've had a lot on your shoulders, and the fact that you even agreed to do this call now versus waiting another month or two, I'm crazy grateful. But is there anything that you want to share on the way out? Because I mean, we could just talk for a long time. Anything that to the audience that would be out there that you want to close this out with?
Sure. I think, again, it's okay not to know. I think that's one of the things. It's okay. We don't know until we know. And again, giving yourself the grace and compassion to be okay with that. And to reach out to your community and support and your team if you need that. Community is really, really important to me. As I mentioned, I also have been a yoga instructor, hence my interest in mental health counseling. And so one of the things I do every year is an annual retreat to Costa Rica. Part of that, it's based around connection. So connection with nature, connection with community, connection with self. That's really, really important to what I do. So it's a week to really, my hope is cultivate connection in different ways and start to do some of this cultivation of awareness in where am I now? Like, who am I now? And taking that time out of the daily grind, away from technology, getting into nature, getting into the jungle to start asking ourselves those questions, and then being held accountable by the community that we create there forward to where we want to go. So, and
I love that, and I want to say thank you about this, is that you brought up the retreat at the end here too, because in the intro, everybody's already seen this video, and I mentioned it in the intro, and I mentioned that it's in the blog, but all of a sudden you can get caught up in this hour-long conversation and forget that was ever even mentioned. I'm big on community. I believe in community. I believe in making sure that we are plugged in to community. We have a lot to both give and receive in those. And I believe that retreat is just one of those opportunities to either dive into community, meet a new community, possibly create some lifelong relationships that have a real impact on your life. And so just a reminder that in the blog, we'll have the notes to all of this. We'll have the resources and links that we can provide. But one of those will be to the retreat and to Nicole, so that you guys can reach out to her. But tons of love, everybody. We're going to end this video with you guys, and we're going to hang out for about 2 more minutes after this and just say goodbye to each other. But tons of love. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.